Hello, good morning everyone, dear friends, dear colleagues, queridos compañeros y compañeras que venís de fuera, de más allá de los Pirineos. On behalf of all the dreamers of the Alhambra, we welcome you here to yet another international event that we are organizing together with our allies from the University of Granada. This event is focused on learning and reflecting and gathering conclusions and insights about our master plan that is going to be our strategic document for the following 10 years, hopefully. One of the key points here that we will be dealing with is sustainability, of course. I am usually asked about what's my job here, and I always say that I have to support and sustain the Alhambra, and I have to help the Alhambra to be sustainable. And sustainability is all about reaching a number of goals that are mainly to keep and protect the Alhambra in a perfect way for the future generations. This is key for us. So our patronato is created in a very sad moment in the history of the Alhambra, and at a moment where the Alhambra almost disappeared. So when we read the tales of Washington Irving, we realize that he is talking about very beautiful ruins and historical ruins in a very bad condition. So when we look at Edwards or Lewis paintings, we realize we have a monument that was in a very, very bad condition, that was about to become ruined. That's the reason that for us, sustainability is much more than a fancy word. Sustainability is the very essence of our job. And in this Alhambra, where history crosses with beauty, inspiration, also science, and in many cases engineering, which is the first miracle that made possible the water system, water hydraulic irrigation system that allows this mountain, this Sabika mountain, to become a very fruitful field. So we get together here in order to discuss about this idea of preserving this cultural heritage. We are very responsible when we look at the present, but we are also committed with the future. So we have this idea of integrating technology, science, management, and many times just like common sense in order to ensure this capacity even to get a little bit isolated from the day-to-day political issues. So we have to take care of what we are, and we have to ensure that our collective memory is still alive and it's still inspiring, because this is our goal here as well, to inspire the coming generations. It is also essential to highlight a very beautiful aspect of the Alhambra, which is interdisciplinary dimension. So we are in connection with other colleagues from different public administrations, and when we show them the wide variety of jobs here and functions and roles, so they are always they just wondered about they are amazed by this the amount of disciplines that get together and live together here in the Alhambra, and that inspire each other as well, because we have specialized roles, but they are always connected and they inspire each other, and this is very enriching for all of us. The Alhambra is a great example for this interdisciplinary dimension. So we have one of the mathematicians here that is an expert and is going to talk us today about gardens. So mathematicians are talking about gardens, so this is the kind of interdisciplinary we like and we love here. And we also want, together with something very critical for us, which is the support you always give us, the knowledge, the talent you shared with us, the idea that the idea of going beyond the practical dimension, to go into the savoir-faire as well, and to be in touch with the academia, and to be able to keep and to share in the future all this knowledge. This is very important for us as well. And finally, as our dear, very wise and very good head of gardens, forests and gardens, heritage is not only preserved with knowledge but also with sensibility and with teamwork. So thank you very much for all the efforts you've been deploying with your team for the organization of this conference. And at the same time, we've organized another event, a very symbolic event, which is planting an olive tree in memory of Mr. Zaragoza, one of our heroes here in the Alhambra. And also you've been doing all that while you were keeping and taking care of these wonderful gardens in this season change, something that is a very critical moment in the year. So I'm very proud of all the work you've been doing, like cutting the trees with 6 different teams, sculpting the nature here. So all the contributions here, all the ideas shared here are going to contribute to the reinforcement of our international network. Granada wants to be a key member of this network. It is difficult to get to Granada, you may know it very well, those coming from abroad, but it is always worth it. So we want to keep being this center for heritage management. And thanks to all of those who made possible this meeting. Thanks for supporting your heads so they can have the time to participate in this kind of events. And as many times in history, and we hope in the future, Alhambra is now a space for the meeting, for gathering together, for sharing. So welcome to you all to a wonderful city. And let's make past and light our future today. Thank you. And I give the floor now to our Vice President that has been essential to the organization of this event as well. So it comes from the University of Granada, of course. Thank you very much. Welcome, everyone. I would like to apologize on behalf of Pedro Mercado, our president. He can't be here because of his agenda. So I have the honor, and I'm lucky enough to be here representing our university to participate in this opening roundtable for this conference that, as Rodrigo just said, is the result of the joint work of many institutions, academia institutions, public institutions, and international networks that are committed to the strengthening and the advancement of heritage protection. So we are here in a place that is a symbol of culture, nature, knowledge. So Alhambra is the key reference in one of the most important matters for this event today, which is sustainability. And all throughout the history of the Alhambra, sustainability has been a core issue. It has to do with water management, energy management, and landscape management, with this water system that makes the most of all the water resources, optimizing consumption, helping to the climate situation. And Alhambra is very well known because of its gardens and because of the efficient use of materials that are properly adapted to the site. And currently as well, the Patronato of the Alhambra carries out different policies in order to promote a preservation model that puts together science, responsibility, sustainability, and respect for the memory of these places. And there is a dialogue between past and innovation. We're going to deal with that. We're going to talk about that and how science can be put at the service of preservation of heritage. So during these days, we have created an event to tackle the main challenges of our present moment: climate adaptation, sustainable development and management, social and economic dimension of the heritage. And we're going to use an open interdisciplinary approach, and we believe that sustainability can only be achieved putting together this ethical commitment and the joint action of many institutions and stakeholders. So we want to thank, as the university, we want to thank the Alhambra and General IFE Council for inviting us to participate and for putting us in touch with all these institutions. We're going to have the opportunity not only to get to know the Alhambra, but also the Hospital Real, which is the headquarters of our university. And we have the opportunity during dinner to enjoy as well one of the Carmens, El Carmen de la Victoria, that belongs to the University of Granada and that offers one of the most beautiful pictures of the Alhambra. So we hope that these working days will be fruitful and helpful for the conservation of our world heritage and of our nature. Thank you so much for being here. Good morning, welcome. Thanks for being here. Thanks for making the effort of coming from abroad, from very far countries. Thanks to all of those who are providing services here today in the Alhambra and this great monument today and every day. I'm going to just explain a little bit of logistics that are important before starting our working sessions. First of all, we are asking you to allow us to take a family picture before starting. So thank you, Maria, for all your coordination efforts. So after my intervention, please, if you would like to take a family picture, we can go to the patio of this palace and take this family picture. And also, in terms of logistics, you're going to be supported by all the personnel of the staff from the Alhambra and General IFE Council. So we're going to have little coffee breaks in the morning and also in the afternoon. And we're going to be having lunch at 1:30 in the Jardines Alberto, which are at a distance of 10 minutes walking in the gardens of Comerez. And tomorrow in the evening, we're going to be having dinner in the wonderful Carmen de la Victoria, which is just in the Alba. I think it's in the opposite to the Alhambra. For these activities, it is important to have a good organization, right? So you need to write your names in the different lists to participate in the events, because we need to know how many we are and we need to properly plan the activities. So as our director just said, we have a main goal, that is to exchange our experiences and to get connected in this so necessary transdisciplinarity. And we need to focus our new master plan for the Alhambra for the next decade. And to do so, And also, in order to give you a little bit of context, we have organized workshops and a visit to one of the sites that are just very close to this room. And it's going to be guided by Pedro Salmerón. It's going to be a very interesting and insightful session and visit. For the workshops, we're going to divide you in 5 groups, and we'll need you to get your names on the lists, right, for the workshops. You have the people of the organization in the door outside, so please take a minute to put your name in one of the lists, please, during the coffee break. So we're going to have the members of the team like Montserrat Zamorano, Rafael Molina. Rafael is a professor at the University Politécnica in Madrid. And that for the workshops. And finally, it's important to highlight that for our transfers or cross-cutting working sessions, we have to make estimations of our footprints. So we're going to do an experiment, a test, and we're going to try to make the whole estimation of the footprint with the people of the company Omawa. We have Teresa here, and they can help you as well if you need anything for this purpose. So at the end of your little booklet, with the agenda and with many other information about the biographies and the CVs, the resumes of the different participants, you have a QR code. And with this code, you're going to have access to a form where you can add some important data for the work we're going to be doing with Omawa for the footprint. So don't forget to do this, please. And that's everything on my side. Well, if you allow me another short intervention, I would like to tell you that last week we had the chance to be representing Spain in Beijing in the Sustainability and World Heritage Conference that was held there. And basically, one of the main points we wanted to share there was that sustainability, of course, requires tools and systems, but at the end of the day, it is a cultural issue, it is a cultural matter, and it has to do with a strong belief in this. And many people ask me, where's your card? And I said, no, if I had cards, my gardeners will kill me. I have a digital card, and that's how we work here in the Alhambra. So this experimental project about the footprint, we like to share it abroad and wherever we go, because we're very proud, very, very proud, and I want to show off a little bit with our colleagues from abroad, because we are the first cultural event in the world, I insist, in the world, that has obtained the label, the certification of sustainable event. So this is something that has to do with our culture here, and we had the dean of Philosophy and Letters of Granada. We were working with her, and we said, okay, we're going to have a cultural event, very important one, cultural, with Salman Rushdie in the opening session, and we wanted to say, well, we have to limit our impact and we have to erase our footprint, and we had the help of the University of Granada to do so. I just wanted to share this. This sustainability is always at the core of what we do, and it is a part of our DNA. We have to be sustainable. There's no other way. Okay, so thank you very much. we can go to the patio for the picture, for the family picture, and then we will start at 10:15. Thank you. Hello everyone, my name is Maria del Pozo Lopez and I'm here on behalf of the Cultural Landscape Alliance and I'm the General Secretary, and it is a great pleasure for me. I would like to thank Rodrigo and his team for giving me the opportunity to be here in this wonderful place in which I always feel at home. And thank you very much for giving me the opportunity of being here, but also being in charge of moderating this wonderful roundtable with wonderful speakers. So, this session is called Challenges of Climate Change and Environmental Commitment in the Management of Cultural Heritage Assets. We are going to tackle two of the main topics for this subject. First of all, we will talk about adapting historic gardens to climate change, and also we will talk about hydraulic engineering and water management. So first of all, I will do a short introduction about this topic and these two different topics by saying that climate change is one of the biggest challenges for conservation and management of World Heritage and cultural sites. Historic gardens are especially vulnerable to the adaptation of climate change and different weathers like the rising of temperature and all these collateral effects that are here and that we are facing here in the Alhambra. They have studied all the different effects, and sometimes I've had the opportunity of getting to know how they deal with these kind of effects like pests and different species that are making damages to the vegetal structures and the irrigation channels that are used here in these spaces. In this scenario, and talking about challenges, I think the biggest challenge regarding climate change is how to design and to put into practice different strategies in order to allow different historic gardens to be able to adapt and to protect their value. Those strategies need to focus on the resilience, taking into account the garden itself, not only the vegetal part, but everything related to the garden. So the water management and irrigation channels are key to protect the historic value of the whole site. Hydraulic engineering is key, and also new technologies, innovation, and different structures that can be developed can help us to focus on the sustainable principles when we are managing our gardens. Climate change is leading to the creation of a new model based in transdisciplinarity of management, combining knowledge, research, science, innovation. And innovation is key for making this key adaptation to the different changes that we are facing. In a few words, historic gardens are not only the legacy of the past, but a past that is still alive, but they need to be like cultural properties that are key and essentials regarding the change, the adaptation to climate change. So within this context, I think we are going to talk in this session where we are going to see very key examples showing how we are taking into account all the different challenges and the uptake of different challenges. We will see the Kew Gardens in the United Kingdoms and the Caseta Network or Sajunia Gardens. So we are going to see many examples, and I will give the floor now to Raul. Before, we will present what he actually does
regarding this garden. So I will introduce you to Raúl Curtis Mechin. Raúl has worked for more than 35 years in different positions within the field of heritage. And he has worked in the National Trust as a counselor of gardens and parks. And he was worked in the east part of the United Kingdom. And he has worked within the field of landscapes in Scotland. He has also been the director of the Horticultural Traders Association. He has worked as a director regarding the visitor experience in Royal Botanical Gardens in Edinburgh. And he has been the co-author of a publication called Plants in the Gardens of Scotland. He has also been in charge of a publication about gardens. He worked as in the field of landscapes, and he's the executive director of the Royal Botanical Garden of Kew in the United Kingdom. Raúl, thank you very much for being here. It is a great pleasure to have you here with us, and the floor is yours. Thank you very much, Maria. Hola. ¿Me oís bien? Muy bien.
Good start. Thank you for the welcome. I'm delighted and honoured to be here. This is my first visit to the Alhambra, my first visit to Granada. So far it looks beautiful. I only saw it in the dark last night when I arrived, but I'm looking forward to it very much for the entire week. So I'm going to talk about planting for the future and Kew's landscape succession plan. Kew Gardens is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. The reasons for it being a World Heritage Site are twofold, really. It's the design. It's a heritage landscape. It's had designers like Capability Brown and some of the most famous English landscape gardeners from the English Landscape Garden School influencing Kew, and that's 18th and 20th century designs. But it's also, first and foremost, been a scientific and a learning institution. And it's had a consistent record since 1759 of studying plant diversity, learning about plants, and really conserving nature and conserving plants. With that comes a huge responsibility. Kew Gardens, when it was given by the royal family it was to the British government, it was to the public really, when it became open to the British population, it became very popular. And it's become more and more popular ever since. So we've gone from just over 1 million visitors 10 years ago to now more than 2 million visitors. We're under pressure, as we all are now, to make more money. Our government in the UK is making it clear that there'll be less and less year on year, which means, from a garden's point of view, more events, more commercial activity, more pressure, more artists, more art exhibitions, all of which are great fun, and it's good to get the rewards from the visiting public, but it also brings a responsibility on us as managers for the future when we've got these physical pressures that we can't stop, but now we have climate change on top of that, which is just making those pressures all the more stronger and making us feel them more keenly. So how we plant our landscapes is going to become critical in the future. Also, how we manage our landscapes is going to become critical. When I say become, it is already. We're changing, and we have been. It's been going on up here for the last 10 years. In my lifetime, I've noticed huge change. When I was a kid growing up in Scotland, we used to have snowdrifts up to here. When I grew up, I was off school for 2 weeks every year. We haven't seen a snowdrift like that in the last 10 years, 15. My son's 25 and he's jealous about the weather, the way we talk about it. So what do we do as landscape managers? We think about the plants themselves. We also think about how we garden. So we also need to think in tree time. I love this phrase. I've stolen it from Kevin Martin. He's head of our arboriculture team at Kew. But the way he explains it is beforehand, if you're just thinking about your own garden, you think about a pot or a border, you can change that every year. You can pick the plants out, you can try something different. If something's died, fair enough, you change it. But not when you're looking after trees, and not when you're looking after a structural landscape. Tree time dictates more than 100-year horizons. We're used to thinking in 1-year operational plans, 4-year budgets, 10-year conservation management plans. That's not good enough. For trees, to plant one tree now, we're really not going to see the benefits of it for 50 years. Then they'll start. 100 years, it'll mature. In the case of some of our oak trees, we say they take 200 years to grow, 200 years to mature, and 200 years to die. So who wants to make a bet on what type of oak tree to plant tomorrow, right now? In Kew Gardens, we were hitting 35 degrees regularly this summer. We've almost hit 40 degrees. Kew Gardens as a site is on a light sandy soil. It's river soils, right beside the River Thames. Very good drainage, means we can grow quite a lot of exotic plants. It's also a nightmare for a lot of those plants that we collected 150 years ago, because they came from quite wet soils in China, the Himalayas, could be Nepal, from all over temperate regions. Now, the soils are getting so dry so quickly, and we're getting these droughts that are hitting us from, well, pretty much January through till May, June, sometimes July. This year, it was dry until beginning of July. These plants will not cope. So at Kew, we have 11,000 trees, 1,200 species. The question we have is, if we know that a lot of these trees aren't going to grow, do we start again? Do we move site? All these things are being considered. No, we're not going to move site. And no, we're not going to start again. We can't rip everything out and replant. Well, we could. It would be a heck of a risk. I wouldn't like to call that one. What we will be doing is doing things gradually. So yes, the trees are giving us the structure. Now, basically the climate in London is tracking, we think was tracking Barcelona. That's been the latest prediction. So London right now is Barcelona 50 years ago. London in 2090 will be Barcelona right now. So I don't know Barcelona, but I have heard the climate stats, and I think we are going that way. When I've gone up to London now, if you're in a suit and carrying a laptop bag, it's just a sweaty, horrible experience, particularly going the underground. We don't have air conditioning in the UK. We're not used to this. So if we know that we're going to be like Barcelona, the challenge we have is trying to think of where these trees for the future might come from. Certainly some of our existing trees, the ones we've always relied on, trees like silver birch, Betula pendula, rowan trees, Sorbus orchiperia, English oak that I mentioned earlier, Quercus robur. We know these trees aren't going to grow in 50 years' time. In 100 years' time, pretty much forget it. They're at the limit of their tolerances now. Now, as a horticulturist, I can be quite blunt and make these decisions, and I can just think of it, okay, if Quercus robur won't grow, Quercus petrea might, Quercus, Quercus is probably going to be a good tree for the future. And I'm quite looking forward to the experiment. But for a lot of other people, these trees are part of our culture. A lot of our songs, a lot of our poetry relates to the oak trees, relates to willow, relates to the rowan trees. It's going to be an upheaval for us culturally to be shifting our trees. Our landscapes will look different. It won't come upon us immediately, but it will be quicker than we thought. It's taking us all by surprise. And the idea behind these conferences is brilliant, and we need to keep doing these and have them as often as we can, because we're all facing these problems, no matter where we are, Caserta, Germany, Bologna, UK, Alhambra. So thinking of the future is critical for us. So we do have access to data. We do have access to climate modeling. We've looked at some of the climate data, and some of the climate modeling that's come out so far has been very focused on just temperature. So Botanic Gardens, well, no, I'll start with the Botanic Garden in Melbourne in Australia. did a lot of work on its succession plan. Australia's heating up more quicker than any of us at the moment. And they came up with a tool which judges the planting for the future based on the mean annual temperature, what we call plant hardiness in the UK. Now, cold tolerance, it's a good measure for plants, but it's not the only measure. And if you just look at cold tolerance, you're ignoring a plant's moisture requirements. You're ignoring a plant's humidity requirements as well. And these are critically important for an awful lot of plant species. So what we've tried to do is look at the climate assessment tool that came out of Melbourne Botanic Garden, which Botanic Gardens Conservation International is the international group for botanic gardens. They've adopted this tool and made it free for everybody. And it's been useful to a point, but it's not given us the data that we really needed for Kew. So what we did, we overlaid the climate assessment tool and the mean annual temperatures with some of the climate moisture indexes. And that gave us a broader picture. Two ways of looking at future planting. One is what we call provenance. So we might look at existing species. So take Quercus robur. It's got a big range right across Europe to some very warm parts of Europe. So maybe we could source seed of Quercus robur from hotter parts of Europe and beyond and try those in the UK. Maybe we could do the same for beech, for Fagus sylvatica. Or we start looking at species which might be new to us in the UK, but are growing and thriving in regions which will suit what we think our climate's going to be in 100 years' time. It's kind of guesswork. It's educated guesswork, but we have to start somewhere. So by looking at how our climate's going to be, we can also look across the world. There's areas, for example, in Spain around Altamira, which look very promising. Southeastern Europe, around Romania, Bulgaria, and into the Middle East, around Iran and Azerbaijan, also look very promising for us as well. So we're starting to do collecting trips to these areas to source seed of different trees that we think will be suitable and bring them back. We've got nurseries at Kew Gardens where we're trying to test these plants out, and we're planting them in the gardens. But as those of you who have a relation to plants and horticulture know, the plants don't read books, and the plants don't really listen to climate modelling. So the trees themselves will ultimately decide what's going to grow. And despite our best efforts, it'll be up to them really how they grow. And it's one thing for us to grow a plant in what we call a mollycoddled environment, a very nurtured environment in a botanic garden. It's another thing out on the streets. So we're trying to find a use for these trees. If they grow well at Kew, will they grow well in the streets of London? Will they replace a lot of plants, a lot of trees now that are struggling? A lot of birch trees, for example, are starting to struggle in the heat. So we're testing them in the real world as well. We're partnering with London boroughs, London Borough of Richmond, London Borough of Brent, and we're doing live experiments. We're turning parts of Kew into what we call a living laboratory, so we can actually test these trees out in the real world. And as we all know, it's one thing to plant a tree, it's another thing to protect it from vandalism and contractors who water once and then disappear and don't prune. So looking after and nurturing is just as critical. So a big job to do. The paper here, which you probably can't make out the text of, this is by Kevin Martin, the guy I mentioned earlier, is head of our arboriculture team. His latest paper, he's done a lot of coding himself, he's used a lot of technology, a lot of the curatorial team's work as well, to produce a new model which overlays the climate moisture index data with species distribution modeling, which gives us that map of where the suitable species might be, but then we look at the moisture indexes to give us that next dimension. In his study, he also examined the relationship between the climate moisture index and the leaf water potential. And I went across a whole variety of trees, and this is how we understand a tree's physiology as well, particularly in terms of drought tolerance. Trees will change across time, so we were finding we were getting these droughts that kicked in March, for example, when a tree is just coming into growth. It's just starting to develop its what we call leaf turgor, that firmness of a leaf as it comes out of the bud and it unfurls. If the drought kicks in then, for some trees, they were stopping and they were almost going dormant just at the time they should be coming into growth. Now, in a garden with 11,000 trees, that's okay. We can cope with that, with a few trees doing that. But if that's your street tree, a lot of street trees we're planting for shade, we're planting to cool our cities down. If that species is suddenly going dormant when it should be growing, that goes into reverse. We're finding it actually warms up the air around it, and it makes the situation even worse. So you're in a city, you've got this heat island, it's getting warmer, trees are supposed to cool it down, but if that tree's physiology is changing and it's going dormant, it can in some cases actually increase the warmth around it. So we're learning a lot through this process. We've been using linear regression analysis. We've been looking at statistically significant relationships between the climate moisture index and the water potential. We've been looking at how that changes and how the line changes when a species responds to changes in moisture availability. We're finding species that have a positive relationship between the climate moisture index and the leaf water potential. They exhibit a greater tolerance to fluctuating moisture conditions, so they will handle droughts better. Those that don't and have a negative relationship will be susceptible to drought stress. We might not find this out immediately. We might plant some of these trees, and then in 20 years' time, they're stone dead, and we're back to the beginning again. So this work it's critically important. I promise you, I'm not giving you a big science lesson. That's about it on the complex bits, but I think it's important to explain the different factors. So all this research is basically underscoring the importance of our conservation, but also our management strategies. Because once we've planted these trees, we then have to try and understand what pressures they're under. How is that moisture changing, not only in the upper atmosphere, around the leaves and the branches, but also down below, in the roots. Now, trees can be quite frustrating to work with. They're incredibly patient members of our gardening fraternity. They often don't show stress until the next year. So if they've had a really bad summer and a really bad drought, they might drop their leaves early, but you won't notice any real problems sometimes until the following year. That's not good enough in climate change. The climate's changing too quickly now. We need to get sharper and better at understanding when that tree's stressed. So we're introducing environmental moisture sensors now in amongst our tree roots, which will give us real live data to the arboriculture teams, and they'll get a reading on their phones, water now, intervene now, set up the irrigation systems to step in and intervene before it's too late. So all this research we're hoping will come together to give us the guide to what to plant, but then the guide also in how to manage it. I'd love to come here with a great ta-da moment and say we've got this model which is free for everybody to use. It's not ready yet. It's only just been published, this paper. It's a devil of a thing to work with. I don't understand it. To be fair, directors often don't understand a lot of the nitty-gritty, but at the moment it's Kevin, his colleague Tom Freeth, and the folks in the curatorial team that do it. We're working on the next iteration, which will hopefully give us a model that we can use widely. We are in a position where we can give specific advice to sites and do it. We can offer almost like a consultancy service on that front. So I don't know if that's of interest to management planning for any of you, but it's a thought for the future. As I say, in a couple of years' time, we'll have something which will be readily usable. So yes, it is complicated, but we are making great headway. This is collecting in Georgia. One of the plants we've found potentially to be a star of the future is Fagus extorica. It's a naturally occurring hybrid of beech, hybrid between the oriental beech, Fagus orientalis, and European beech, Fagus sylvatica. This looks to be far more resilient to spring and summer droughts than our native European beech. And we have been growing this one in our nursery at Kew. This is one where we've now got them to probably decent sapling stage, and they've been planted out in some London street situations. So in the following year or two, we'll start to get some live data about how well they're establishing. We're about to start building. Kew Gardens has two sites. There's Kew Gardens in southwest London, we've also got a garden in the country at Wakehurst, down in Sussex. Wakehurst has deeper clay soil, a lot more moisture retentive soil, but also moist atmosphere. The climate predictions for Wakehurst, totally different to Kew, so we're able to spread some of our plantings. At Wakehurst, we're starting work on a conservation nursery, which will give us a much bigger facility. We can engage then with industry partners and get some of the bigger growers in the UK, growers like Hilliers, Wyvale Trees, people like that, to come in and work with us. Because again, it's one thing on producing these trees as botanic gardens and pushing forward the science that in how we grow them and how we can plant them, but we need the growers to be able to bulk them up at sufficient numbers so they'll be available to local authorities and to plant in the real market. So that's coming. And yeah, so collecting and testing from seed from these regions is also helping us understand how they're growing in the wild and what pressure they're under as their current climates are changing. We also have the Millennium Seed Bank as part of Kew Gardens. This was what we like to call it the most biodiverse place on the planet. We've got tens and tens of thousands of species. Some in cryogenics, in cryogenic preservation, a lot just in refrigerated units. But the seed bank was set up in year 2000, and all the seed we're collecting, we're working with the seed bank to freeze and store it now, but also to start collecting seed as these trees grow in Britain and see how those seeds are changing through time. The Millennium Seed Bank, the thinking behind it originally was almost like a Noah's Ark to try to keep all these species alive, a safety vault, if you like, for our world's plant species. But seeds don't last forever. Some do, maybe, but quite a lot might only last for 15 years. They start to degenerate. Some have what we call a half-life. We know in our living collections, for example, out there with our plants and plants in the garden, they only last for so many years. Seeds can be similar. So we need to start using the seeds, and the seed bank is now changing to have much more practical application. So the learnings that we're picking up individually for some of these tree species, we're also applying these learnings to meadows, to agricultural seeds, to plants on a landscape restoration scale. We do a lot of work. We work in about 100 different countries at Kew, and we help landscapes, we help restore meadows, we help restore ecosystems. A lot of ecosystems now are on the point of collapse. And if we don't get in there now to start replanting, we might lose them forever. So within our succession plan, which I'll come to in a sec, we do look at tree choice. We also look at diversity. We have an expression, putting all your eggs in one basket in the UK. We can't just pick on, say, Fagus X Torica and think, great, that's the one. Let's plant it by the million. That's a crazy choice. We have to be as diverse as possible and keep adapting and keep changing. So we're trying different provenance, we're trying different species. We're also trying different cultivation techniques in the garden. Maybe there's different soils, maybe there's different ways of experimenting. Just chatting to our colleague from Bologna earlier, it's a lot to learn. We're also against the clock. It's changing so quickly. Sometimes we want that research to be next year, next month. We've got to be patient, though, and try different things. We also have to be aware that we are a World Heritage Site. So our new trees and our new species are going to alter the character of our landscapes. So we need to also think about the structures, and if it's an avenue, maybe we can look at different tree species, sure, but what were the characteristics of those avenues? Were they evergreen oak? Our Scion Vista Avenue is mainly evergreen oak. That's a really characterful tree. Fagus X Torica looks nothing like Quercus ilex. Is there something we can think of that will be somehow similar? So it's that balancing act that we face. We also look at shade. I got a shock. I'm from a very northern climate, Scotland. I'm used to the challenge of wet weather and cold weather and how we have keep our gardens open and attract visitors in cold periods. This year I got a shock. Our visitor numbers nosedived. They were flatlining middle of June, end of June, just when our budgets are hoping for the highest numbers. No, it was too hot. You know, it was reaching 35, 36 degrees regularly. People don't want to get on a tube, on the underground, or on a bus and travel to a garden. Yes, the gardens are maybe cooler if you're sitting under a tree and there's a breeze, but even when you're walking around the gardens, it's blitzing hot now. So we have to think about the shade and think about what we're creating here. Also, the water needs of these trees. So we're working on what we call a living landscape plan. That's the next generation. That's going to ground our succession thinking. But that gives us a different way. We're talking about adaptive management now in our landscapes, where I was having this conversation earlier about conservation management planning. I think gone are the days where we could think 25 years was good for a plan. Our plans won't really hold for 5 years now. We're almost thinking of a zone in the garden. Okay, what's our plan for this year? And at the end of each year, what's worked and what hasn't, and then adapting for the next year. So we're having to think on our feet quite a lot. So when we think of a choice of tree, what are its requirements going to be? What zone of the garden are we thinking of putting it into? Because if it's in a really intensive area of the garden where we can't irrigate and it's going to get a lot of compaction, that's a big consideration for that tree's success or failure. So yes, it is complicated, but it does keep us in work. And to be honest, it's also hugely exciting because it's what we've always done. We've always had to adapt to climate. We've always had to adapt to changing circumstances. But we do also appreciate that there's a vulnerability to some of this. We start to classify our existing stock. So the starting point for this is to look at what is at Kew Gardens, what's in all your landscapes, and try and evaluate what condition they're in. Then try and look at where they are in their tolerance for the future climate predictions for your site. And we started with 3 classifications. One was vulnerable. So vulnerable species are those that are, at the moment, kind of at the end of their range. So that includes our English oak, it includes a lot of magnolia trees, it includes our English lime, a lot of trees that give our garden our classic structure. Another 5 degrees, on average, will kill those trees. They just won't tolerate that climate, specifically at Kew. So vulnerable is one category. Resilient is our second category. Now, these are trees that have a good bit to go in their range. We're probably looking at, in 100 years' time, they may start to get vulnerable. So the evergreen oak I mentioned earlier, home oak, we're thinking is pretty resilient. Oriental plane, hornbeam, Colereteria, a lot of these plants which you're probably used to planting, and I certainly saw these at Caserta, they're ones that will take a certain amount of heat. They'll take the UK for the next 100 years, at least. Then we have future resilient. Now, some of these are trees which we're looking for the long future. Some of these are Spanish. There's Iberian alder, Alnus lusitanica, Montezuma pine from South America. We're looking as broad a range as possible across the world. Yes, and hopefully this will give us our super long-term framework, which is the best we can hope for just now, and we can establish that scale. So we talk about these plants and these trees and the gardens themselves. When we look at how we're managing our gardens, climate change is also presenting problems to the way the gardens are used. So to our visitors, there are problems being created now. Certainly at Edinburgh, when I worked there, we were getting a lot of flash flooding in the gardens. We were having to close up to a quarter of the garden when we get these torrential downpours, and our drainage systems weren't coping. So we started to look at nature-based solutions in the gardens themselves. And I'm quite excited about this area, certainly from a botanic garden context, because with nature-based solutions, we're looking at using plants to actually help us adapt not only our gardens to make them workable, visitable, enjoyable, but also the learnings from there will also be applicable into our towns and cities. There were parts of Edinburgh that were closed. We started a research program called Plants with Purpose at Edinburgh, which was starting to look at which plants and which species did, how much water they absorbed. We started to come up with measurement frameworks for each plant to look at how effective it was in a rain garden or a swale. What was its evapotranspiration rate? How much water did it hold in the soil? How much water did it slow down with its leaves and its structures? Every plant's different. Every plant group's different. Every individual plant has a slightly different character in terms of its water attenuation. Also, plants act differently together. And we were finding, certainly in the rain garden in Edinburgh, that the benefits increased exponentially if we got a multi-tiered planting right. As part of this living laboratory, we partnered with Heriot-Watt University, and at Kew we're partnering with other universities to look at and start to develop measurement tools and frameworks which will help us learn not only how effective our current plantings are, but also what are the plants for the future. Really being realistic, if we're going to make our cities livable, yes, our local authorities will have to introduce rain gardens and swales and all these other features that they are doing. But each of us as individuals, if we own property, we're going to have to think about the stormwater journey off our own roofs and down each pipe. If we're in a city flat, where's that water going? We'll need to fit a stormwater planter to every single pipe. So that's for rainfall and water attenuation. Nature-based solutions can also be very useful in cooling down our cities and cleaning our air. Again, every plant's different. In a previous role when I worked for a trade association, we sponsored the first PhD which proved that some climbing plants will act as external air conditioners. They'll help cool a building down in summer, but they'll also help insulate it in winter. It comes down to the N values, the evapotranspiration indexes, individual leaf hairs on individual leaves, down to species differentials, but also evergreen, deciduous, semi-evergreen. The classifications go on. The work's endless, fascinating work, mind-blowing when you look at all the plants that we try and grow, but also as a potential future for us. A lot of great learnings. Watch my time. Okay, so nature-based solutions, not only for the physical nature of the gardens, but also how we adapt our management regimes. We need to start thinking about, in the past, we might have thought about pruning a certain bed or dealing with a certain part of the garden at a certain time of year. Go in there with the pruners, give it its annual prune, and then move on to the next one. Now we're starting to think of, well, hang on a minute, every plant hosts a certain bug, it hosts a certain insect, it hosts a certain ecosystem around it. That's important to the biodiversity of the garden and the wider environment. So we need to be thinking about managing our gardens for biodiversity as much as for every other reason we've been doing it. So a lot of learning, but a huge potential benefit for the future for all of us. And I think if we can get this sweet spot right and influence our governments and show that they work through developing these measurement frameworks, we'll get them more widely adopted. So here's some examples. This is the garden I mentioned in Edinburgh. This part of the site, a third of the garden drained, naturally sloping down to this area. And when it rained heavily over a period of weeks, it just flooded all the time. The rain garden went in 2019, and that area has not flooded since. At Kew, we've just put in a new carbon garden. Part of our duty as well at Kew Botanic Garden is to educate the public and educate our visitors. I also think it's worth educating our lords and masters, our politicians that are giving us less and less money, because they should be giving us more and more money, I think, because if we're doing this, we're helping deliver some of their policies and helping our cities adapt. So we've found that the carbon garden and actually having areas of our garden where we explain and we can demonstrate what we're talking about, it goes a long way to not only educating the public, but also the policymakers. Here's a meadow where we're showing that whereas before we would cut everything to within an inch of its lives and have it neatly mown and looking perfect, not anymore. We can't justify that, not in terms of the energy use, not in terms of sustainability. They're biodiversity deserts, some of our perfect lawns of the past. Now we're thinking about different mowing regimes right across the whole garden. It's doing things differently for the future. The gravel garden is more drought-tolerant planting, what we call xerophytic planting, which we're starting to experiment with. I was talking to a journalist recently who said, is it the death of the English herbaceous border? Is it the end of these wonderful flower gardens? No, not at all, but we'll have to adapt. We won't be able to do the plants we have right now. There'll be new species, new varieties that we can use. This is the carbon garden, opened in July. Some of the plantings mimic the climate stripes. You know, that famous picture came out of Reading University. It goes from blue to orange to red, and all that orange and red is the last 10 years where the climate's really ramped up. We've tried to copy that in the garden. And we show the carbon cycle. We show what it's all about. We talk about these expressions, net zero, carbon neutral. What do they mean? You know, and they can put a lot of people off because it's science, gobbledygook. By explaining what the carbon cycle does, what a plant does when it grows, it takes carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere, produces solid carbon. It's a good thing. If you cut that down, take it away, that releases the carbon back in. We show that in the garden, and people can see it. And so far, we have 90,000 school children that come through our gates every year. And I've been amazed. They all now go to the carbon garden, which is great to see. So it's in educating, inspiring, how we translate the science work, translate that where horticulture meets science, meets the public, and meets the real world, is that space we're working in. That's why we talk about it as a living laboratory. Any solutions we come up with in the garden have to be useful elsewhere. Otherwise, what's the point? I complain about government, but they are funding us. All our work is publicly funded, so it has to be of use to everybody. Pardon me. And yes, interpretation is critical. I marvel sometimes with botanic gardens. I think people could visit Kew 50 times and really not understand what a botanic garden does. And to be fair, it's very difficult to explain what we do. We've got 280 scientists working at Kew. We've got a herbarium that's got about half the world's plant species in it. We have a DNA bank. We've got a reference library. We've got the seed bank I mentioned earlier. A lot of these things the public don't really see into. And it's part of my role to start thinking about how we translate that too. We're a victim of our own success. We're quite a large organization. We're the biggest botanic garden in the world. With that comes a challenge in that we tend to get very siloed. The scientists will do the science. The horticulturists do the garden. The educators just do the educating. And it's crazy because when we all get together, the impacts are multiplied massively. So I try as much as possible to get teams to work together and talk together. So I mentioned the Kew succession plan earlier. It's on our website if you want to look at it. I'm not sure about the translations of it so far, but this is the succession plan published in 2024. This is our framework to the stuff I was talking about earlier, about us, how we choose our species, where we start looking for the species of the future. What we've started working on now is what we call our living landscape plan. So succession plan, great, future framework, but how are we managing the garden at Kew? How are we going to, bit by bit, start to take the learnings from our succession plan and implement them in the garden? How do we apply nature-based thinking to that? We talk about nature-based solutions. Well, really, if you step back from that, it's nature-based thinking that we need to be applying and doing in our garden. And also how we do thought leadership. One thing that we can all do in these sites, Kew is a great example. We can also create we are sponsored by our governments. We take public funding, so we can invite policymakers. We can get industry together with the policymakers themselves, with practitioners, and we can debate these things. We can release some of our science. We can start talking about this is what we think is going to be happening in the future. Help us translate that into real-world solutions. You know, we can't work in a lab in isolation anymore. So I think that was me. Is that about right for timing?
Yeah, you're perfect.
Is that good?
Time, yeah.
Okay.
Sharp.
Muchas
Always sharp.
gracias.
Muchas gracias, Raúl, por tu
Raúl,
discurso.
for your intervention, that it's very inspiring, a little bit worrying as well at the beginning, when you said that maybe in the next 50 years, the reality as we know it is going to disappear. But anyways, it's a very inspiring presentation. I've liked very much how you highlight the importance of what happens not only in the garden but in the cities, in everywhere around the garden, not exclusively in the areas related to the garden, because there's all the landscape that it's not protected. Sometimes botanical gardens are kind of islands that have a very high level of protection, and most of all if they are World Heritage sites. But we have to translate this experience in the gardens to other places and to our day-to-day places or gardens where we do not have these very high levels of protections. So that is historical gardens can be a very interesting lab to find solutions to the climate change. And another point I would highlight is the social responsibility you assume in the Kew Garden in order to show the community with these visits from school children, and how you translate for policymakers what's happening in the botanical garden and what is happening in general in all the gardens, whether they are historical or not, and how important it is to take action to protect them. So thank you very much for this intervention. I think now we have a little break, half an hour break, and we'll meet here again at 11:30. Thank you. Yo quiero un café que me muero.
Hi again. We are going to keep on advancing with our agenda after this coffee break. And we are going to start with the first case study that will be explained by Dr. Claudius Werke. I'm going to share with you his professional experience, and we will see what he has to share with us. So Claudius Becke was born in Gorlitz. He studied and obtained a doctorate in landscape architecture by the Dresden University of Technology. He is an elected member of the German Horticultural Society. He's also an elected member of the working group on historic gardens of the German Society for Garden Art. He's also the chairman of the gardens section of the working group of German castle administrations, and he's currently the head of gardens of the state castles, palaces, and gardens of Saxony. Claudius is here to talk about the impacts and strategies for coping with climate change in the historic gardens of the state, palaces, castles, and gardens of Saxony. The floor is yours. Buenos días y gracias por esta presentación.
In
Es
Alhambra
un
the
placer para
second
mí.
time. First time was 2008. It was my honeymoon. And I'm still together with my wife, very in love. And I think it is a good sign, I think. It's a pleasure to tell you something about climate adaptation at the Saxon's Garden. And I'm sorry, I will read it on my paper because when I try to speak free and fluently to you, 20 minutes are really much too low for me, too less. So I will read it, that the program will go on. So the gardens, state and palaces, castles in Saxony combine over 300 years of multifaceted garden history. Among other things, they tell of influential rulers with royal pretensions, of the display of power and splendor in the garden space, and of the supreme artistic understanding of accomplished court gardeners and architects. But it also tells of armed conflicts, destruction, threats, transformation, and change. From their creation to present day, the gardens have been subject to these dynamics. Whereas in the past it was cannon fire, bombs, or a changed understanding in use, since the 2000s a new threat has spread, initially unnoticed by many, but then all the more serious. Climate change does not stop at Saxony's gardens and has now become the defining issue in horticultural activities. Wooded areas are particularly affected by climate change, a worrying thing, given that they play a key role and be main structural elements. Following the extreme weather conditions since 2018, with mild winters with little precipitation, extreme weather events, storms, and particularly the prolonged summer droughts and heat waves, the tree populations in Saxony's gardens have suffered noticeable damage. This is evident in visible losses of vitality, radiation damage, increased spread of pathogens, and above average tree motility. In numerous areas, the familiar historical landscape is changing rapidly as a result of an ongoing process. The impact of climate change is clearly evident in the tree data continuously recorded by our garden department for almost 27,000 trees. This data is recorded in a digital tree register as part of ongoing tree inspections. The gardens under consideration show that the necessary tree care measures, ranging from tree felling to dead wood removal and necessary in-depth examinations, have increased continuously between 2019 and 2024. The necessary tree felling measures are a good example of this. While in 2019, the number of trees felled was still in the usual level of 9 trees per year compared in previous years, this figure rose to 43 in 2020, 305 in 2022, and 445 in 2024. We will go up in 2025 more than 500 trees. This demonstrates the impact of climate change on the Saxon's gardens, which is leading to a sharp increase in the need of tree care and a significant additional expenditure of personnel and financial resources. In addition, there are significant increases in maintenance deficits and impacts on the traffic safety. The Grand Garden in Dresden is particularly affected, as its inner city location and heavy use by up to 1.2 million visitors per month placed additional strain on it. Temporary closures are now commonplace in order to meet the extensive tree care needs and ensure traffic safety. In order to counteract climate change and support horticulture expertise through further research and measures, a diverse package of measures was introduced by us a few years ago. This was supported by 3.3 million euro in funding from the Federal Republic of Germany for measures. I would like to present some of these below. In addition, our garden department relies on networking with a wide range of partners at national and international level to evaluate the planned measures. Great that Alhambra, Spain, Caserta, Q is now a part of it. Particular emphasis is placed on close structured exchange with the garden administration of the working group of German castle administrations, the gardens section. Together, we implemented a project funded by the German Federal Environmental Foundation that brings together old, proven gardening knowledge, recently applied strategies and long-term measures, and makes them available to the general public in a prepared form. Please take a look on our homepage, Klimaanpassung, that means climate adaptation, minus Gartendenkmal, also minus gardenmonument.de. Sorry, it's in German, but we have Google Translate or things like that. At the heart of the project is a diverse program of measures focusing on the triad of soil, water, and trees. The module serves in particular to improve the location and increase the resilience of the park's trees. To this end, leaf, needle, and soil samples were taken in the Grand Garden in Dresden and Pillnitz Palace Park, in cooperation with the Institute for Soil Science and Site Ecology of Dresden University of Technology. As a result, pH values, the CN ratio, and storage densities were determined. Analysis of ion content are also currently underway. In addition, TDR probes and measuring devices were installed to measure soil moisture. These continuously and automatically record the suction tension values digitally and transmit them by radio. The data collected so far serves that the basis for analyzing the trees that have died as a result of drought in recent years. As a result of the diverse samples to be evaluated, measures for soil improvement in the gardens can now be derived. These range from organic components such as compost, horn shavings, sheep's wool, to mineral components such as expanded clay, expanded slate, or loam, and mulching, with organic material through trichoderma treatments, soil injections with low release fertilizers, structure improving substrates, and root zone aeration. In future, biochar will also play a key role. An estimated 12 tons will be produced annually, our garden's own needs, using the park's own federally funded pyrolysis plant, which will be located in the Grand Garden in Dresden. The equipment has been ordered and will be delivered in early December 2025. So we are really looking forward to this containers here. The pyrolysis plant will be fed with bark chips from tree maintenance and is intended to counteract the loss of valuable organic matter. In these climatic times, many times more of this organic material is produced than in normal years. In addition to the possibility of closing material cycles, the park's own production and use of biochar substrates offers further enormous potential, such as the activation of soil life through improved water retention capacity and long-term CO2 sequestration. In recent years, increasing scarcity in Germany has raised awareness of the value of water as an element and resource. It is foreseeable that the availability of fresh water will continue to decline in the future. This is something we have to thought about in Germany. You did decades before, yeah? I'm convinced, yeah? For this reason, our Gardens division is planning comprehensive measures in the area with water management. These include basic data collection, such as an overview of existing water rights or groundwater measurements, and their comparison with previous data sets. Upgrades to the existing water infrastructure, such as wells and pipelines, and the installation of digital water meters at all extraction points with monitoring of the quantities extracted. This data will be used to optimize the use of irrigation water. This will also involve the increased use of drip irrigation, the installation of additional automatic irrigation systems and additional watering rings, and the optimization of the time of day of irrigation, with extensive irrigation taking place mainly at night or in the morning. You know that all, I'm sure. Water remaining soil modeling. This is also something new for us in German. For you, this is old stuff. Water retaining soil modeling compatible with historic gardens is also being considered. We also leave long grass standing in the root area of trees rather than cutting it short, in order to protect the roots from additional heat and the soil from additional drying out, thanks to the shading effect of the grass. The water problem also inevitably led to the idea of relieving gardeners of heavy physical and time-consuming work through innovative technical solutions. After analyzing the potential, the decision was made to develop a watering robot, which was realized as a prototype in collaboration with the Technical University of Dresden and the Barkhausen Institute. This is a semi-autonomous mobile water tank that supports horticultural irrigation work by autonomously filling and navigation to set waypoints, while simultaneously manually controlling irrigation. The plan is to further develop the device into a product and put it into use. It is also crucial for us to communicate these and other measures in a targeted and effective manner to the public. The same like Raul mentioned in his presentation. This is done, among other things, through our own website. Events at locations affected by climate change, a thematic traveling exhibition, and opportunities for participation, such as part seminars. We tell it part seminars, and I really love part seminars. Part seminars are a wonderful way to enable interested members of the public to participate in the care and maintenance of historic gardens, to support the preservation of parks in the park areas in the need of care, and to raise public awareness of garden conservation and climate adaptation in historic gardens. It would be great. There is a lot. I gave lectures about the park seminar topic. It would be great if park seminars could find new friends in Spain, Italy, or England, in addition to Germany and Poland, where they are already held since decades. Please feel free, contact me. It would be a great pleasure to tell you more about park seminars. There is no time today. From an ecological and garden conservation perspective, the large number of old trees currently dying represent losses that are almost impossible to compensate for. For this reason, tree replacement in the garden monuments of the state gardens of Saxony, also in Kew and Caserta in Alhambra, will be of paramount importance in the coming years and decades. This involves selecting and promoting desired target species such as English oak, spreading species hornbeam, and red beech in particular. At the same time, aggressively spreading species such as Norway maple are suppressed. In this way, the entire garden area can be understood as a tree nursery and cultivation area from which the stands are to regenerate and renew themselves to a large extent. An important basis for replanting is also providing by in Germany we tell it garden monument conservation target plan, including a woody plant concept which was at the latest developed for Grand Garden in Dresden, for Atzella Monastery Park, and the gardens at Albrechtsburg Castle in Meißen. 3 of our 18 gardens. The trees and shrubs required in our Saxon gardens are sometimes difficult to obtain in the necessary qualities and quantities, and are becoming increasingly expensive to purchase. There's also a risk of introducing pathogens. For this reason, we have decided to grow our own resilient trees and shrubs adapted to the local conditions, that are adapted to the local conditions. To date, 3 tree nurseries and 3 shrub cultivation areas have been established in our gardens over the past 3 years. In the Grand Garden in Dresden on the historic site on 5,500 square meters, in Pillnitz Palace Park on 1,000 square meters, and in Moritzburg Palace Park on 500 square meters. A few weeks ago, the first tree nursery gardener was hired and now is starting the necessary tree work. So we are at the very beginning of it. I've done it in my former estate. I was the head of gardens at the Prinz Pückler Park in Branitz, and we started a tree nursery there in 2010, and we can take a look over the knowledge my successors now have. That's great to see. So we start in Saxony now also. Yes, I have to finish but I started later on. The trees and shrubs grown locally are expected to be particularly adaptable. In future, bare root and own root plants of smaller sizes will also be planted wherever possible. This will ensure that taproots remain undamaged, which is important for the roots to penetrate deeper into the soil layers supplied with stratum water. It will also make better use of the fasted growth and of young roots. Since small planted trees and shrubs are particularly vulnerable to vandalism in public areas and generally suffered from wildlife browsing, they will be protected with a stable tripod enclosure and wire fencing you can see in the middle. This should also increase public acceptance and appreciation of the young trees. To improve soil aeration and water and nutrient absorption capacity, we also use phytomelioration. This involves the temporary use of deep-rooted plants to loosen, aerate, and improve the soil, especially in the root zone of particular trees. A selection of species tailored to respective location is used, for example, Phacelia, Field, Mustard, or Lupines, which are introduced without digging and whose seeding is to be prevented by timely mowing. The reasons for this approach is the evidence of severe soil compaction in our gardens. Conventional methods, including aeration using compressed air, can only provide limited relief. Sometimes they are not deep enough and were very costly, which is why we should resort the methods of green manure that have long been known and used in agriculture. The strategic sequence of steps for replanting can be summarized as follows. First, the genetic diversity and adaptability of the original tree species should be exploited and offspring obtained from our own stocks through selection. There is a wide range of genetic material inside. An oak is not an oak. If this is not successful, the second step is to work with woody plants and seed sources from comparable climate regions. Raul mentioned it. For us in particular, we have to focus on the Balkan region and Bulgaria. In particular, for us in Saxony, this has to be do with winter frost and dry summers. And we know, despite of climate change, we will unfortunately never have palm trees in our gardens. Only. We never know. No, we have the alpine region, so we will have the winter frosts. Only if this also proves unsuccessful, we will switch to new climate resilient species at the last resort for replanting. All the approaches are being prepared in parallel. A glance at the history's books reveals that every generation of gardeners has had to contend with a wide variety of challenges in its own way. Today's generation faces the particular challenge of climate change. It is to be hoped that the many efforts, also here in Spain, that have been made to address this issue will be successful, and that historic gardens as important testimonies to art and culture and as vulnerable refuges of nature and the environment will enjoy a bright and secure future. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much. I don't know if you hear me. You hear me? ¿Se me oye? Sí. Muchas gracias, Claudius. Thank you very much. If someone had told us 50 years ago that people from the United Kingdom or from Germany would be really worried about water, we would have never thought that would be true, but actually it is nowadays. Estaba diciendo que si hace 50 años hubiéramos pensado que gente de
ago,
Reino Unido
we thought that
o
people
de...
from the United Kingdom or Germany would be worried about water management. For us, it would have been incredible. I mean, we thought it would never be possible, but the reality is that today this is the case. So, and now we are moving to the next speaker, Javier Sanchez Gutierrez, and he would talk about water management and green heritage spaces in the Alhambra and generally facing the climate change.
So currently he is the head of gardens in Granada, in the Alhambra, and he's a landscape engineer by the University of Madrid. He's been an officer in the regional government of Andalusia since 1990. So he's been working, he has an expertise of more than 30 years in the management of protected areas. So he's been director of the National Park of Sierra Nevada. He's also been a manager of the Parque Natural de los Alcornocales, and he's been the head of service for the natural conservation in the regional government of Andalusia. He's a member of the Union for the Conservation of Nature, UCN, and currently he's the head of service of gardens and forests here since 2019. Si me puede buscar la presentación. Okay, well, I'm going to try to make a synthesis and to tell you very briefly how we cope, how we manage climate change here in the Alhambra in terms of, at the EUCN, sorry, in terms of gardens and water management. Green gardens as well, and with many different services involved, many different services of the Council of the Alhambra involved. We also have the participation of companies that do their best in different kind of contracts, for instance, Traxa, Tale, different companies that are stakeholders in these multidisciplinary teams. So I'm speaking here on behalf of the Gardens team, the technical team, and day to day they are the people making it possible to work and taking care of our vegetable beds or our gardens and all the forests around this monument. So we have all the people from the different functions here, and we are very aware of our responsibility and of our privilege. We work here in this fortress, small village, monument, hydraulic engine that has been forged since the 13th century and that has received so many awards and acknowledgements throughout history. So we are the very south area of this continent and very close to the Mediterranean Sea as well. So we have this responsibility as the Alhambra and Generalife Council for the management of all this. In 1984, the UNESCO recognizes the monument of the Alhambra and Generalife, and later on it widens it to the district of the Albaicin. So with this exceptional value, and so we have a landscape here that is absolutely magnificent and exceptional. So we have many different kinds of values here in the monument, the gardens, all the work made at the different artistic dimensions, and we have all these forests and tree areas the vegetable gardens, and you know that there's this historic hydraulic system that has gone through different transformations throughout history. And we have these collections of gardens, medieval gardens, Renaissance gardens, romantic, even modernist gardens that have a surface of more than 11 hectares, and we also have 6 hectares of vegetable gardens that have been grown for more than 8 centuries, and we have all the forest around the monument. So there is a very important transition between the monument and the city area that is ensured by these natural spaces in the west direction with the different valleys of the Genil and the Darro rivers. So if we need to identify in a synthesis exercise, we need to identify all the challenges and the risks and the effects that we can foresee. I believe that we have to stop in 4 basic elements. First of all, water, because of the, as my colleagues said, the reduction of the rainfall, and particularly in the critical moments during the summer. We also need to talk about biodiversity with the disappearance of some species, with the appearance of pests, and the changes in the behavior of different plants and species. We're going to have as well more frequent extreme events related or catastrophes related to fires, hydrate risks, geological risks, and as a consequence, something that is going to be determining for the public visit of a monument that receives more than 2.5 visitors every year. So in all these different elements or considerations I will share with you, we're going to focus on these 4 chapters. First of all, water. It's important to highlight that the hydraulic system that is built at the same time of the first walls and towers is an absolute miracle. It comes from the Darro Valley, and it starts at 6 kilometers distance from the monument. So we have an image here that shows what would be the medieval situation. We have the Sabica mountain that starts in the city and that goes to the west, and we also have this crossing between the Genil Valley and the Darro Valley that cross at some point. So at the 13th century, this process starts, and there has been many different evolutions and transformations. So we had these irrigation channels that were, or these ditches that were in the Darro Valley, in the left river of the Darro Valley. So these ditches that were amazing for the time being, they ensured this function of providing water, of course, and the maintenance was absolutely was very expensive and very difficult throughout time, and at some point another channel was built. That is the channel currently providing water for the monument. So there is a strength and also a weakness, and this strength comes from the separation of drinkable water from the irrigation water that is so important to this whole complex. And we have the weakness that is the insecurity around rainfall or around the water contributions in terms of quality and quantity. So we have a river with different kind of elements present in the composition of the soil that are going to this river basin with limestone and dolomite substrate. So this is going to be a condition for the amount of water we get. So when we have this intake point at 6 kilometer distance from the monument, and we have beneficiaries at the other end of the river that also use water, so we are forced to carry out an ongoing work with the institution responsible for the basin, and also to be very careful about the water provision for our monument. And in this case, we are working with these two institutions in charge of the Darro and Genil basins. So another very important element is that we have to combine the protection of the historic elements of this World Heritage with technification. Technification is very necessary, is essential for the management of this resource that is getting more and more scarce. And for that, there are a number of elements that we have to take into account when we tackle the challenges, the present and future challenges. So there is an environmental importance in terms of biodiversity, leisure. So for these elements, these ditches in the south of Andalusia, the ditches or these irrigation canals are very important. So in the last decades, we've been restoring these historic ditches in order to improve the connection of this natural heritage of the monument and also with the metropolitan or the city area. And this is also a very important task for us for the future. And we have to integrate a remote follow-up and monitoring system, and we have advanced quite a lot during the last years, and it is also critical because we need to have information in real time about the capture of water and distribution, intake, and in order to have a capacity in order to be able to react to the different needs, and particularly in the summer months. So we have to integrate technological elements, take care of the groundwaters as well, and to do so we have rooms like this or facilities like this where we have elements to measure different parameters, and we have valves, and we have like the whole system to monitor any kind of leaks. We have flow meters, and as Claudia and Raul also said, we need to be able to create these irrigation maps according to the temperature conditions, soil conditions, weather conditions. So this irrigation have to be very smart, and we have to consider all the elements, and we have to attend to the specific diversity, the structural diversity. So these maps are absolutely complex in terms of gardening, and we have to also be very aware of the irrigation systems we have available, and we have to give tools to our gardeners, to our technicians that have to be experts and have to be able to use all these elements. So we have traditional irrigation systems in some places, and some more modern systems in other places. So drip irrigation, well, depending on the places. And one of the examples that we may know when we talk about water is this circuit of the Patio de los Leones, the Lions courtyard, for this fountain. So we have elements that are very similar, quoting this poem about this fountain. So we try not to affect each part, we try to avoid water affecting other parts of the architecture. So when we are in summer and there is very high temperatures, so this can affect as well the water flow. Our experts in conservation, following these monitoring systems, they work in order to preserve, in order to protect these materials that have been so important during history and that will still be in the future as well, not only from the symbolic point of view, but also in practical terms. So now we pass to the biodiversity dimension. So we have to use the heterogeneous the spatial variety, the vegetal variety, wildlife variety, and this is essential from the ecological point of view. We have to implement GIS. We have to make this census of trees. We're doing it. We still have to finish it, but we've already enlisted more than 7,000 trees, individuals, and now we have the opportunity to make this follow-up. We have all this data that will help us a lot in terms of security, conservation, and that together with all that has to do with the flower parcels, with the vegetable gardens, the forests as well. We need to have healthy forests with a wide representation in the different layers. We need to have a diversity of species. And for that, we have our experts helping us. You know, to tackle adaptations and nature-based solutions, we have to consider that sometimes the restoration criteria are not the same as ecological criteria. So there's always this concern about climate change, and we have a very flagship. We have the bog here, which is our flagship species, the boxwood. We have around 6.7 kilometers of boxwood around the monument. And this is a species that is in decline very clearly because of the climate conditions that make it more vulnerable to the pests or different fungi, different diseases. So for that we have to work, and we're doing it with adaptation strategies, with microclimate strategies, creating atmospheres that we can't set or as we like, and also working with resistant boxwood species that are being created now. And we have to know as well that the vigor of myrtles, that it's also something to consider. And when we deal with historical gardens, the situation is different to the botanical gardens because we have a responsibility to keep the integrity of these exceptional universal values. So the question here, and I'm sure we're going to talk a lot about this because it is a very common question here in the Alhambra and all around the world, and it is a question that is present as well. It's on the table for UNESCO, is which is the acceptable change limit, right? We'll talk about that. Okay, so pest diseases are one of our challenges as well. We try to avoid the chemical or extensive treatment. We prefer to use biological elements, predators, natural parasites, and we also use this healthy biodiversity with some kind of bats or birds, also naturalization of water spaces, trying to learn the lessons of nature, of course, with water plants, algae, different kind of insects, amphibians, and sometimes helping to the conservation of some species of amphibians as well that are in a situation of vulnerability now. And we can talk a lot about this, and we will deal with this in the workshops, how to avoid using chemicals, fertilizer or pesticides, but still ensuring the situation, because it's essential with our climate. We have 37 degrees during a number of months, so we have to be very aware of this. For the prevention of disasters, we have to be aware that we are in a mountain, on a hill, on top of a hill. So we have to be very aware of how some basins we have in downhill can entail some risks. So because we have situations of dragging whenever there are high rainfalls, and so there are risks. We have Fuente Peña, for instance, that is a very small stream, and sometimes there are very high flows in this stream that is very small. So we have to be very aware of that. We have to keep track of the flows, the flow rate, and we have to be very aware of these different streams and how much flow they can distribute. So we have to be aware as well of the extreme rainfall events. We have very fragile substrates sometimes, so we have bioengineering and bioconsolidations in order to tackle the instability of our soils. And we have places like the Tajo de San Pedro, the vegetable gardens in the Cuesta de los Chinos. And we also have the fires, which are a terrible reality that are very common here, and Alhambra is not an exception. We have the Cerro del Sol, which is a place very close to municipalities as Cenes, and unfortunately, every year we see there are fires. We have an extremely important plan. It is a prevention plan that is used whenever there are extreme winds or very high temperatures or very low humidity during the summer period. And this plan involves measures we have to adopt. So this is the defense against fire in order to protect the forest around the monument, the west side forest in particular. Sorry, the east side forests. And to do so, we have species with more humidity that will help avoid fires. And we already have examples of good measures that have been successful. Okay. And to finish, I'll mention some elements that are important to consider. So we have almost 3 million visitors every year. We have heat waves here very often during the summer. We've been forced to adopt a action protocol in case of heat wave, with different measures depending on the alert level. nature-based solutions, of course, in critical points, such as the one you see in the image, around the Alcazaba or around the Atrio, maybe, as well. So we are developing this plan in collaboration with the Conservation Department, and we've been forced to plant natural shadow and to plant more fresh spaces, more trees to have low temperatures. As you know, it is also very clear for everyone that trees help control temperature in the cities. So besides these natural-based solutions, we also have to replace rigid pavement or rigid paving. So we have to use different materials that are fresher as well. But if we talk about tree areas, we have another action protocol that is equally essential and that has been developed during the last year, and it is the prevention against winds, strong winds, because the security is very important in a tree places like this. So we attend the predictions of the National Meteorology Agency, and we have as council our own climate or weather stations. So we have different teams that are working on this phenomena, but it is a critical issue for the present and for the future here and in many other places as well. And there is controversy around this because the models used by the weather agencies are statistics models and they are based on percentage. So, but we have these public visiting circuits and we have a connection with the city, and there is a lot of controversy because sometimes we have a provision, a forecast of wind, and then it doesn't happen in reality. So it is a topic that we should mention, we should discuss later on. And we also have the communication strategy of Q that I consider fantastic in order for the citizens to get to know which is the reality of the management of these sites. So to sum up, we have vegetable gardens, trees, forests, and protecting all this, we also protect the stability of our monument and also the stability and the health of our city. And we talk here about ecosystemic services. We talk about fighting climate change, eliminating pollution, reducing pollution, improving the well-being of our citizens and our visitors as well, in terms of leisure and enjoyment of the place. And we also have to insist on the prevention and the creation of habitats for the biodiversity. So protecting all of this is protecting ourselves, and this is the job we're carrying out. Thank you so much. Thank you very much, Javier. Once again, you're proving how wonderful and exemplary your work is. It is a work that can be replicated in other places and that can be very helpful for other sites in terms of prevention. Now, I mean, you know that we are a little bit behind schedule now. I don't want to stop all the speakers. I just mentioned that you have like 5-10 minutes left because all the interventions are very interesting. So I would like to invite now Paola Viola and also Alberto Minelli.
while we are changing the speakers, and I'm going to start with the presentation of the two speakers that we have here with us. And they both come from the Regia di Caserta, close to Naples, and Paola, welcome, and from the University of Bologna, Alberto Minelli. I will let you know what they are going to share with us and what is their professional background. They will talk about the management and sustainable conservation plan of Caserta under or facing extreme weather events. Paola Viola is the person, the contact person for the protection and improvement of the gardens of the Regia di Caserta. She's graduated in conservation and cultural and environmental heritage. She's working at the Caserta Palace on behalf of the Ministry of Culture of Italy, and she's also the contact person for activities regarding or relating to the care and enhancement of the environmental and landscape heritage. She deals with the technical scientific activities, and she works with this park and the English garden that we have in the Caserta Gardens. She is in charge of several exhibitions and scientific initiatives that are promoted in the field of the Regia, and she is currently working on her PhD at the University of Bologna. She has produced several publications and articles in specialist journals, and she has participated in conferences on the theme of landscaping and historic gardens. Paola, thank you very much for being here. I will talk about Alberto Minelli now. He is lecturer and researcher specialized in gardens and ornamental arboriculture. He has participated in the restoration of historic parks and gardens, especially, he has collaborated with the FAO and other institutions for the maintenance of green areas, and he works in teaching and in Asia, Africa, and Central Europe as well. He's the author of more than 200 publications regarding landscaping and conservation. Paola and Alberto, thank you very much for being here, and the floor is yours. Buenos días, gracias por haberme invitado.
It's a real pleasure for us to be here and share with you some activities organized by the Museum Regia di Caserta. Regia di Caserta is the royal palace of Caserta, built from 1752 by the King Carlo di Borbone, Charles Borbone. And it's not only historic garden for us, but it's a very cultural landscape, and that included the square, the palace, gardens, hood, and the Carolino aqueduct, so called in the honor of the king. As a UNESCO site, the museum has the responsibility for the protection of its heritage, also living heritage, so plants and very important responsibility. Last summer, for example, many fishes died in the fountains due to the high water temperature. So we need a constant monitoring and for the sustainable museum. Suggestive landscape system with different types of gardens and different conservation needs. For example, we have the Italian garden or oldest garden, a formal garden inspired by French garden, and landscape or English garden. And in this slide, you can see some data about our gardens and our big numbers. In this context, water is our primary resource that links architecture and botanical elements. Probably for this reason, the king and the architect Luigi Vanvitelli wanted to include water was useful for mills, factories 8 kilometers long, mostly underground, and it still supply the Regia. And the water is so. Today, the museum must correctly manage the water resource. For example, now we cannot use water flow from aqueduct for irrigation. And so in the summer, we have to water first monumental trees and grand parterre, but the turf grasses are left to regenerate naturally with the seasonal rain, reducing artificial irrigation. While the aqueduct could help us to preserve both the water resource and water historic landscape. So, to repropose a self-sufficient management model, the museum is carrying out an important project, a new efficient and sustainable irrigation system that take advantage from the water financed by Next Generation EU funds. We have to finish in 2026, so next time I'll show you the result of this project. And in addition to water management, for our gardens we must face a lot of problems. For example, the presence of old trees, the value of botanical collection, and climate change. And so, in 2019, after one of the Bronx storm, museum promoted a study of park with the support of a research institution to ensure the technical scientific skills. And in 2021 and 2024, the museum signed a collaboration agreement with two universities, University of Bologna and University of Napoli. And okay, let's see what the situation was in the garden. The storm pulled down 70 trees, big trees, and none of these had been declared to be felled in the previous inspection by important agronomists. And all the trees declared dangerous are still standing. In that storm, also a monumental Cupressus macrocarpa fell, and the museum decided to leave it in the English garden, while a big oak destroyed one of our wall and ended up on the public road. As the violent events have become most frequent, the museum decided to call upon the skills of agronomists, botanists, phytomycologists, and so on. And the two universities involved are for us a national excellence. The agreement consists in no-profit procedures of mutual benefit. Universities have a wide field of research, and the museum has an important scientific support. For the technical aspects of the agreement, I leave the floor to Professor Minelli.
Sì. Sì. Grazie. Sì, sta perfetto.
Bueno, voy a tratar de hablar en castellano si no es un problema.
Speak in
Creo que no.
Spanish if it's okay for you. We have the interpreters here, so I don't think this would be a problem. So here you can see the best topic of research that we have dealt with. And we haven't chosen them, in fact, but this is the topics that are needed in a historic garden. So the problem here is that we have trees, vegetation, and they are dynamic. I mean, not like rocks. So we need to understand what is happening to those living and dynamic species. So we need at least 3 years to get to know what is happening to this tree. A tree has his genetics, and also the place where the tree lives, it's very important. Like 50% is linked to the genetics and 50% is linked to the location of this tree, because when a tree lives in a specific place, well, the tree is going to grow according to that. So as climate change is really very clear, so can trees make changes inside them due to climate change or not? So this is why we are doing many researches in the Kurdistan region, like to the north of Iraq, where we are using Italian trees, trees that are very large, like 6 meters or 10 meters. We are not using seeds as in Kew Garden, but what is happening now is that they are suffering like temperatures of 40 and 50 degrees in order to see what is going to happen in the next years and what is going to happen also when we reach those temperatures. In a historic garden, it is clear that we have like monumental trees, but we also have an architecture and also security issues, as you've mentioned earlier on. It is very clear that we need to try to find this vicarious vegetation. I mean, to see that we have like a kind of trees that are very similar to the ones we have, in order to avoid that the garden is losing its essence. Now, I'm going to explain how we are working. For instance, at the university, we have the best technology. Here you can see a mobile mapping technology that we are using in Italy. We only have one, and it is used in the University of Bologna. This was the first time that we use it in a historic park. So in half a day, we are able to do all that you are seeing now. We are not only taking pictures, but we have pictures, multispectral images, and there are a lot of data that we need to work on in order to get the results. Here you can see 2 examples about monumental trees, about what we are doing here. So this is a tree that is inside a greenhouse. And first, we need to understand why this tree is in this situation, why this sabre is in this kind of situation when they are in a very good, this kapok K-pop is in this situation because this is like, well, a tree that is very old. So we have an inclination of 23 degrees, and we also have the greenhouse. This is a Pinus pinea. There is a, well, kind of consolidation here. So what we've done here is a reconstruction, a 3D reconstruction of the tree. And in every level, we have done a lot of researches in order to be able to discover the real consistency of the tree, to see if there are problems there or not. And the conclusion is that in 5 years or more than 5 years, what is going to happen? Because we cannot tell what you need to do on a tree in 1 year. It is very difficult to understand the whole tree. And when we understand exactly what the tree needs, we can do like a projection, a 5 or 10 years projection. So this is another point. Here we have like a two alleys, a double avenue of holm oaks. And it's like the same shape as a chair. I mean, where you sit and where you put your back. You have both sides. But since we are facing problems every year, because we need to cut the trees every year, so we are not having the holm oak in its natural shape. So we are facing loads of problems, and we are trying also to understand what is the real situation of those trees that we still have in this double avenue. We are using what we usually use in different trees, and to see what other places are using to test if it's useful or not. This is a multispectral camera where we can have the NDVI with all the waves, lengths. Here we have the GNDVA. First, we are working with red color and then with green color to see the physiology of these trees. So before taking the decision of what we are going to do in this double avenue, we need to know exactly how these trees are. 29 trees have dried, 616 will disappear in the next 5-10 years. And when we are working in architecture, it is sometimes difficult to have different trees, so we need to plant the trees at the same time so they have the same size. And this is what we do in different parts of Caserta, but not in the double avenue. We can plant them in other places. So we will do this, we will plant these new trees, but we have 3 phases. And in 3-4 years, all the trees will be replaced. In order to conclude, I mean, we have worked a lot, and the agreement has been renewed for the 3-year period, and because people want to have immediate answers, and we need to work in mostly with months and years. Using ChatGPT, I cannot find the answers. Even if I use it, so I don't have quick answers there. We are not working also in the greenhouses. They are not classical greenhouses. They are historic greenhouses or glass houses with historic plants. And we're trying to find, as we've seen in Saxonia, for the humidity, the temperature. What we have, all the information that we can gather needs to be used. And the best places to use it are historic parks. So that's what I wanted to share with you. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you very much for respecting the time. So now we will have the opportunity to keep on listening to other speakers. I would like to invite Albert Fekete, and we will start with the last speaker. Of this session, and for that we will have Albert Fekete. Good morning. Albert will speak about the challenges, the plant use challenges of historic gardens in the context of climate change. He will present the Carpathian Basin case study. Let me say a few words about our speaker, Albert Fekete. He is landscape architecture and head of the Institute of Landscape Architecture, Urban Planning and Garden Art in Budapest. He's a professor, a doctor in United States. He has he has led and co-authored more than 70 completed landscape projects, mainly related to the conservation of heritage sites in Hungary, Romania, Germany, the Netherlands, and Spain. He has received several awards, and for instance, such as the Landscape Architect of the Year award in Hungary in 2012, and the Europa Nostra Award. So welcome. Thank you very much for being here, and the floor is yours. Muchas gracias. Voy a hablar en inglés.
I can't speak Spanish.
Maybe next time.
Maybe next time, yeah. Thank you very much for the possibility to be here with you. And as you see the title of my presentation, I will talk not about a particular garden or site, but I would like to share with you some details related to some problems which affects all of us in this room, especially the problems caused by the climate change and global warming, affecting, first of all, the plants in historic gardens. And about the structure of my presentation, first of all, I would like to give a kind of overview about that region I am coming from Carpathian Basin, which is a geographical unit, actually, regarding to the traditionally plant use in historic gardens from the 19th, 20th century, maybe even 18th century, but basically 19th century. And then to show some examples regarding to the climate challenges of present days in that region, and not only. And thirdly, to see what we can expect, what the prognostics are going to say, and how we can prepare for something like that. And finally, of course, it would be nice to have a discourse, maybe not yet, but later on during the workshops, how to define some general guidelines to manage these problems. I'm going to start with investigating over three species in the past 200-300 years to start to think about. To have even more specific results, of course, we were looking after many studies and researchers did in this field. For example, one from Germany, as you can see, some public parks in Berlin did by some renowned German colleagues, led by Sylvia Buttenschön. And we can see here that in these urban parks, some invasive species are present, but not just are present, they were present in the past as well. Let's say from the beginning of the establishment of these parks, like Robinia ailanthus, we know everyone that in this moment we have many problems with these species. Analyzing the situation in Budapest, the capital of Hungary, in the last 120, 130 years, we can define some milestones here, as you can see with red. But looking at the composition of the urban trees, located mainly in historic gardens, but even in many alignments of the capital, we can see that those invasive species we used to call, like Robinia celtis and ailanthus, were present even at the end of the 19th century. Of course, at that time we did not call them invasive species. They didn't cause so many problems like we have at the moment. But if you look at 1895, more than 50% of the tree mass of Budapest was represented by Robinia. It's amazing. And still nowadays we have a lot exemplars of this species, despite we are fighting against. So, telling more about the invasive species, it's a very interesting research did by some colleagues from the Forestry University from Sopron in Hungary, and they compared how the loyal background in these countries, in these four neighbor countries from Hungary, from East Europe, are dealing with these three invasive species. And we can see that in the Czech Republic, it's forbidden to be planted. In Slovakia, Celtis is already allowed. In Hungary, we can plant Celtis and Robinia, ailanthus is forbidden. And in Serbia, all three are allowed to be planted because the Serbian colleagues told, according to this research, that they are very happy to see plants on the site. Doesn't matter which kind of plants, just to be trees there in some situations. And this is something I think we need to think about. Just to mention an example from south of Europe as well, not from Spain, but from Italy. They have the similar problems, and as you can see in the table, some very typical species of historic gardens in Tuscany belonging to the Medici gardens are in danger, counting in long term at least. And we know that why we are talking about tree species, because the tree species are features or elements which define not only the ecology or the space structure or the visual connections in a historic garden, but the aesthetical quality and the image, the general aspect of the garden is very much defined by what kind of tree we use. And that's why we like to use traditional, authentic tree species in historic gardens. The question is, how long we can do that, and which species are resilient to use in this way. Some horrible examples. This is a reference to research did in Germany in 62 historic parks, and they concluded at the end of this research that the heat and the aridity in between 2018 and 2020 affected all the 62 parks, and the damages are in some cases quite low, maybe 5%, but in some cases can reach almost 100%. So the drought is one of the most important enemy caused by the climate change, and we don't know yet how to find again. An example from Hungary, the Royal Castle Garden from Gödöllő. It's a very nice English landscape garden, and in the last 5-10 years, the Pinus sylvestris started to disappear, drying out. But not only, which is a native in Hungary, native species, but not only some very common species we can find in Carpathian Basin, Acer campestre, you know, it's growing everywhere, or Betula pendula. And very typical for this location are in way to disappear from this garden. From other hand, we try to map the species which are resilient, not only the sensitive species, but to see which species are supporting this kind of climate change, at least at the moment. Of course, many exotic tree species included in Hungarian and European gardens during the 18th, 19th century, but the ginkgo, the liriodendron are very, very common and still very successful species. Some native species as well, and looking at the pine trees, the Pinus strobus, and of course many, many pine trees coming from the southern part of Europe, from Greece, from the Balkans, are growing quite well in these gardens. Of course, we have to talk about the secondary effect of the drought and apparition of other problems like diseases, pests, and this is an example from the Tiszadob Castle Garden from Hungary. We saw the example with the boxwood already mentioned by Mr. Javier. We have the same problem in Hungary, and one of the most beautiful topiaria or most beautiful parterre created as a neo-Baroque parterre in the end of 19th century is in a way to disappear, and we are in a big trouble now how to which what species to supply it. Is it there are big debates. It is allowed to put something else instead of boxwood or not. And we cannot agree. And everything will disappear.
Let's agree to disagree.
Yeah. Prognostics about Budapest. The number of frosty days decreased significantly. It can reach even 42 days until 2100. What it means that these pests, these diseases can survive very easily during the winter. The number of hot days increase, and of course the growing season will be much longer than now, with 2 months. It's for sure that we need some strategy to manage this problem. Moreover, if you look at this map, you can see that Hungary is moving to the Middle East. Yeah, until 2100 we will have a climate according to the climate which they have nowadays in Anatolia, in the south of Turkey. And of course, you know all these problems, but I think if we look at very accurate and particular examples, we can realize even more the problems we have and we meet day by day. This is a case of UK, of London as well. There is a study telling. I'm sorry, I'm very sorry I missed that presentation. But it shows that we are in the same boat. So, and of course, the discourse, some guidelines. There are many texts in this slide. It's not. I am not forcing you to read. More to mention that the local conditions. So as it was told by Alexander Pope, in the 18th century, that beginning of the English landscape garden, we really have to take into account the local conditions. It's even nowadays a very valuable advice. Foresighting, conservation management, to take care more of the water, as we saw in case of, as we saw in case of Alhambra already. The soil management, soil erosion, and soil quality, many times you're not thinking about the soil, but the soil is the basis of everything. Without soil, the plants are not growing. Using all these locations as model laboratories to bringing the students and the colleagues there and doing experiments to see how the plants are answering to different questions. And the last one is using vegetation with a strong resilience, and you can see even a few species recommended by the foresters. Of course, they have another kind of thinking because they plant many from the same species in the same place, and they are thinking to produce a huge mass of vegetation. But still, it is a basis to start to think about. And at the end of my presentation, I would like to show you an experiment we started to do 3-4 years ago. The plant selection for future replantings. As you can see, it's a kind of experiment how to pass genetic stocks for the next generation, looking after old veteran trees in very good conditions and collecting plant material for these exemplars and reproducing this plant material and replanting on the adequate places to make a genetic fund to be used in the future. And as you can see here, we selected until now 6 plant material from 6 different species in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 different gardens during the years. And this is how we try to manage it in the glasshouses of the university, and to finally to replant it at the beginning, of course, on the field of the university, and we'll see in long term how can be used from other reasons as well. So this is a very easy and a very traditional way to do something in favor of this research, let's say. My last slide is about the central dilemma, and being landscape architect, I like very much the plants, the vegetation. I think that I'm going to act in a very ecological way, but in case of historic gardens and in case of landscape architecture, even Frederick Law Olmsted thought that the landscape architecture is a aesthetically based profession for common good. So our duty is to save not only the ecological and the dendrological value, but the cultural and aesthetical values as well. So we have to think in a way and to put in balance in which measure can we act ecologically to preserve the design elements, the artistical value and tradition of these gardens, because otherwise they will disappear in the future. And I don't want to put somehow versus the art, the beauty, and the ecology, but somehow we need to manage them in a way and to explain to the next generation and to the students and to the specialists that to be careful to not deal only with one side, to take a look and to have a care to the other side as well. This would be the main message, and this is what I always would like to talk about in such circles and to hear your opinion as well about this. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Albert. Very inspiring, as always. Thank you. Javier, no sé si tenemos 15 minutos o 10 para hacer una ronda.
How much time do we have? 10? 15 minutes? 10? Okay, so anyone in the audience, do you have questions or remarks, comments, or do you want to stop for now? Okay, I think we can finish these sessions. Thanks to all the speakers. Muchísimas gracias a todos los participantes por sus contribuciones y gracias por estar aquí también al público. Okay, so we will come back after lunch at what time? 3 p.m. Thank you.